Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to the Sacred Life. Once again, I am your host, David, and I have with me here again this evening, Zach. Why don't you give a little bit introduction to yourself, Zach, if you don't mind?
Sure, yeah. My name is Zach, and I'm also from Indiana. David's cousin, and was grew up as a Protestant, bounced around to several different denominations in my youth. Landed in the Churches of Christ as an adult, and became a little disenchanted there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then I spent a little time kind of trying to figure things out, and then that's when I discovered Orthodoxy and been an Orthodox Christian for 4 years.
All right, very good. And tonight, as you see in our title and our thumbnail, we're going to be talking about apostolic succession. Um, Zach, why don't you lay out just a little bit? I don't know, kind of a brief rundown of your thesis for apostolic succession, what you intend to bring out tonight, and then I'll come back with kind of my thesis and what I would like to bring out about it as well.
Sure. Yeah. So apostolic succession. When we say apostolic succession, what we're trying to convey as a concept is this idea, actually from the scriptures, and it's all throughout the scriptures, that ultimately all authority comes from God, and um, as a result, in the history of God's people, so in the Old Testament, Israel, we have people that were actually appointed by God to lead his people, and those people had the authority to pass on that authority to others within the body of believers. So this continues on, we believe, as Orthodox Christians, we believe this continues on into the New Testament church, because we don't believe that that all these different principles that we see in the Old Testament really changed.
Mm-hmm.
We have things in light of the gospel now, um, but you see the same principle being described in the New Testament church. You see the apostles directly appointed by God Himself, by Christ, and then these apostles appoint men after them as ministers in the church to carry on the ministry into the future. So, so that's it in a nutshell. I don't know how much you wanted me to go into detail right there, but that's the general thesis.
Yeah, that's kind of a good just kind of general rundown. And then what I was kind of hoping to bring into the conversation as well is to point at the contrast between an Eastern Orthodox understanding of apostolic succession, what it is, what it isn't, um, and what you might see in, like, say, a Roman Catholic or an Anglican concept of apostolic succession. Because it seems to me, when we see a lot of Protestants, especially non-Anglican Protestants, obviously, critiquing claims of apostolic succession and apostolic authority, I'm especially used to this from, like, Mennonite critiques of the idea of apostolic succession, being of Mennonite background and kind of involved in that world and immersed in like Anabaptist apologetics for most of my life, that they're critiquing something that is different than what the Orthodox claim actually is, and oftentimes aren't aware that the Orthodox concept of apostolic succession is not actually identical to what you see in the West. So that's kind of what I would hope to bring into the conversation tonight as well, just to clarify that. Maybe for people who are curious, maybe people who are struggling with those arguments, to help them to see, we might even agree with some of those arguments at times, but then also a lot of those arguments don't apply to the Orthodox system. They're arguing against something else. Before we go into that, just to again remind everybody to check out the link in the descriptions. You can see, a link there to become a channel member if you would like to support the Sacred Life, gain early access to our pre-recorded content, things like that. Um, and also links to other things such as my iconography website. That's kind of, I don't know, I am the sponsor for the Sacred Life right now, so I'd appreciate it if you'd check out my iconography. There's a 40% sale right now, actually, on all hand painted icons, custom commissions, things like that. So definitely check that out and consider supporting us that way. Also Patreon links, things like that. And as always, like, don't forget, as the banner scrolling across the bottom says, to like this video, subscribe to the channel if this is if this is your first video, or if you've been watching for a while and you haven't subscribed, and please share this video with somebody that you think it might be beneficial for, or somebody that you'd like to argue with, or that you would like to argue with us. And definitely drop your comments in the live chat if you're watching. On these Thursday night streams, we like to engage with our audience. If you're engaging with us, and I generally on all of my streams have a live Q&A afterwards as well. And of course, super chats are welcome as well if you'd like to support us in that way. All right. We have a professional ortho bro in the comments here. That's a rare privilege. Yeah. I'd like to understand how exactly that is like a paying profession, but I don't know, maybe what we are. Maybe we're
mystery.
It's a mystery. The ortho bros are a mystery, that is for sure. Yeah. Nobody can quite answer what an ortho bro actually is. Okay, so I think it's a good time to move into the discussion here. Why don't you start us off here, Zach?
Well, did you want to mention these distinctions that you were talking about with the Anglican and because you mentioned that the difference, our understanding of apostolic succession?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think mostly what I have in mind, and you can kind of help me. I guess, more concretely form this argument if you'd like. But one thing that is really important in the Orthodox understanding of apostolic succession is that it's not merely like a direct succession of the laying on of hands and like the inheritance of authority by virtue of this, but also that it is a succession, like a faithful passing down and preservation, and I guess you could say loyalty to the teachings of the apostolic faith. And so this is something where I think we find agreement with a lot of Protestant criticisms of the idea of apostolic succession as they perceive it anyway within Roman Catholic traditions. Or this is somewhere where the Orthodox position might find some level of agreement with, for example, the Anabaptist position, because we would insist that how would I say this? We would insist that if you do not faithfully pass down the teaching of the apostles and faithfully preserve the apostolic faith, the Catholicity of the apostolic faith, which would mean, like, in its perfection, like lacking nothing but also adding nothing. This is part of the apostolic succession that has that quality. And if you depart from that, as we would say, for example, Rome has departed from the Catholicity of the apostolic faith, or from the true apostolic faith, by the introduction of novelties, or we might say, for example, the Copts or the Armenians have also departed from the apostolic faith in a similar way through the adherence to what we would call Christological heresies, that because of those things, we would say they do not have apostolic succession. Whereas my impression of a Roman Catholic perspective would be that Constantinople, Moscow, the Copts, the Armenians, all of these groups have apostolic succession because they have that apostolic lineage, even if they don't necessarily have obedience to Rome. So I would judge that as a distinction between the two. Like, so for us, this direct genetic lineage, you might call it, is not the only factor of apostolic succession, but rather your apostolic succession is something that you can lose when you turn away from the faith.
Yeah, and one thing that I'd like to emphasize there is that, say we grant that all these different church bodies have apostolic succession, just for the sake of argument.
Hmm.
That in and of itself, so apostolic succession is a necessary but not sufficient condition for being the church. So there's all these other factors that that David was just talking about here. That uh, and like I said, we would argue that they've lost their apostolic succession. So
Hmm.
that's one thing that I want to emphasize is like what is apostolic succession is not. And
Hmm.
just so people know here, I'm going to be pulling a lot from an Orthodox apologist named Perry Robinson. So if some of my arguments sound familiar, I promise I'm not just going to be regurgitating everything he says. I have my own things to say, um, but we don't believe that apostolic succession is just a just a laying on of hands, just this like idea of like somebody putting hands on somebody else, and it's just a line of people. It's just a list of people. Like,
Hmm.
it does it happen to be a list of people because we have 2,000 years of church history? Well, yes, but it's not just that. There's an actual conveyance of spiritual authority. There's an actual
Hmm.
conveyance, and I think we actually see this in the New Testament church. We see this being described by Paul to Timothy. Do not neglect the gift that is given to you by the laying on of hands.
Right.
So, it is a spiritual conveyance, and that's kind of what sets apart, uh, I think, us from, uh, I guess you could say, more modern churches like Protestant churches, where it's the idea of the church is just sort of this people who kind of have good intentions. They might feel like they're being I emphasize feel, but like they're being led by the Spirit, to to lead other people. This is simply just not the biblical model.
Hmm.
And I would challenge like any Protestant to find uh, anywhere in the New Testament where somebody who just feels like they were led, they're being led to be a church minister, a pastor, whatever you want to call it, uh, that they can just decide one day that they're going to be that, or that they're like a church body can just like democratically elect them as
Yeah.
such.
What if I might interrupt you on that one point? I think the example a lot of Protestants are going to point to, and I just saw, I think maybe it was even earlier today, somebody pointing to this as an example to uphold an anti-apostolic succession position is actually Saint Paul, because you could argue, well, Saint Paul, didn't receive. He even points this out about himself. He doesn't receive the gospel from anybody else, but rather receives it directly from Christ himself. And so, that's an example to us that this sort of thing should, or this sort of thing can happen. And that's kind of the Anabaptist argument at the time of the Reformation, is that obviously Paul is an exception, but the church at they would have felt the church at the time of the Reformation finds itself in a desperate position because um, the Romans are like not interested in upholding the apostolic faith, and the Protestants are like just not interested at all in anything historical. And so like they felt like, well, in extreme circumstances, God can raise up people into that line of apostolic succession, like He did with Saint Paul. So that is an argument uh, that you will hear, and I have some responses to that, but you might have some first, and I'll give you the chance to give your response to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that, of course, God can do, basically whatever He wants, but the real question is how do you objectively know whether somebody is being appointed as a minister in the church?
Hmm.
Yeah, like to cite the example of Paul, um, or somebody, or where the scripture says that God can raise. I forget what you said, like something from stones, basically, like that. These are yes, but that would require God to actually be appointing these people through extraordinary means, just like he did with Paul. Okay, so Paul,
Hmm.
obviously, we all know Paul's story. We all know the story of the apostles that were appointed directly by Christ. We know the story of Moses. We know the story of Aaron. We know all these different stories where God used his extraordinary means to directly appoint these people. That's simply not what's happening anywhere, in the 1500s or later with these disparate groups.
Yeah, and I think also in the example of Saint Paul, you also have clear, like you have the clear example with Saint Paul that even though there's this remarkable thing that happens with him on the road to Damascus, and then his powerful personal experience, um, but he doesn't just then decide, now I am an apostle and I am a leader in this church that 5 minutes ago I was persecuting. Some people have the mistaken impression of Saint Paul that he has like this miraculous conversion experience, which he does, but then he's just like instantly on fire for Christ and going out and being a missionary and being this important leader in the church and writing scripture. And they kind of overlook two significant things about him, about his story, which is laid out partially in the book of Acts, but then he goes into greater detail. I think it's in the book of Galatians about his own experience and how he didn't just go out preaching right away, but instead, first he goes actually and submits himself to the apostles and submits himself to their authority. But then he also goes and spends like 3 years in the desert in seclusion, like basically in a monastic cell, you could say, for 3 years. Um, and I think it's something like 13 or 14 years from the time of Paul's conversion, according to his own testimony, until he begins doing any work for the church. And all of this submitting himself to the authority of the other apostles. And so, yeah, like Saint Paul is hardly an example of somebody who just like receives this divine commission outside of apostolic succession, but rather he does receive, you could say, his priesthood and his bishopric from the apostles. And I think it's like a misrepresentation of Saint Paul's story to try to claim that he's any kind of proof against apostolic succession, because he actually is a proof positive for apostolic succession, because he sees the necessity to submit himself to the apostolic authority.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I have like sort of a a small list of objections that you're going to hear. um I don't know if you want to just go ahead and go through those now, since we're already talking about those, or do you want to continue to build the case for apostolic succession?
Um, why don't you send me, before you start talking about them, why don't you send just a brief summary, like something under 200 characters of your points, so I can actually put them up on screen for our audience.
You talking
Is there a
about
way
the
if you put it,
objections?
yeah, just a simple tagline that I can put up
It's going to
might
be
help
in
people.
my weird shorthand, so
Oh,
just so
okay.
you know.
Well, if it's
Yeah.
if it's too much trouble, don't worry about it. I just thought it'd be nice to put something up
I,
on screen there.
I just copied and pasted it, so
Okay.
it apparently it didn't keep the format of.
No, it won't do that.
Yeah. So there's four different four different objections that I have there that I was going to respond to. So the first one is they're going to cite this is a faithful saying, if a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work.
Yeah.
I think what you're going to find, and this is just, I'm just going to preface all of this. These are all, and I don't mean to sound prideful or anything. They're just all reaching very hard because there's no example of how Protestants appoint ministers in the New Testament, flat out. It's just not there. It's all the context is apostolic succession, just as it is through the scriptures. So citing. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say this is like this is a constant problem I see in a lot of Protestant mentalities, is that so often there's like a hyperfixation on rejecting, especially Roman Catholicism, and that oftentimes gets applied to us because we're seen as just being Eastern Catholics essentially by a lot of Protestants, or as having all of the same errors as the Catholics, and so often Protestant positions are actually a reactionary position. They're so focused on why the Roman Catholic position is incorrect, and they don't fairly apply the same sort of logic to their own beliefs, their own doctrines. And so the critiques they have of, say, something like apostolic succession or orthodox ecclesiology, if they would apply that same level of criticism to their own way of thinking, then they would have to admit our way of church governance or our way of driving authority is at least equally unbiblical as what we say the Catholics or the Orthodox have. So that's a very common problem, that you're too focused on being against something, and then you actually lack any positive proof for your own system.
Yeah, and I think where a lot of that generally goes is their best attack vector, I guess you could say, is attacking the threefold ministry. That's kind of where they go, and they think that somehow disproves apostolic succession, when apostolic succession is not contingent upon the threefold ministry at all. I mean, I guess they're obviously interrelated, but the principle is not contingent upon that. So,
I mean, I'm a pretty big proponent of the threefold ministry as being apostolic. I know it's something that like not even everybody in the Orthodox community 100% agrees on. But that's something I just want to mention that real quickly. That's something I'd love to bring on. I don't know, bring on like somebody very knowledgeable who can really speak on you. I don't feel.
I think like Perry. If you could get Perry Robinson on, that'd be awesome. So back to this verse right here. So I think the rationale behind citing this verse is basically to say, look, you have if somebody like desires to be a church minister, what's the problem? Well, yeah, but that's sort of a non sequitur, right? To say that, well, just because somebody desires that means that desires the office of the bishop or some other church ministry that they can just presume the office. That's a non sequitur.
Yeah, I mean, I have a little bit of insight onto this from my own Mennonite background. So in Mennonite church polity, especially in the more traditional groups, there is no somebody deciding they are called by God to be a preacher or to be a minister or to be a bishop. Rather, everybody in any kind of ministry, whether it is like a preaching minister or a deacon or a bishop, is ordained by lot. So it's chosen from the congregation, and then a lot is cast to decide who is ordained. They kind of point to the ordination of Matthias as biblical precedent for that. But the idea behind it is you leave it in the hands of the Lord. And I don't entirely hate the idea, but the reason I want to bring that out is because, you know, we're pretty used to grappling with this verse. And so I'd be pretty familiar with looking at this verse and saying that if somebody desires a bishop, he desires a good work, as proof that somebody can just decide he wants to be a bishop. Like, that's not what he's saying. He's just saying, like, he's just acknowledging, like he desires a good thing. Like, I don't know. There's just like there's not really a positive statement here. That's just I feel like you're stretching to make this verse really mean anything other than just a recognition that bishop is an admirable office.
Exactly. So the next thing that I've heard cited is 1 Timothy 3:1-7, which is basically the qualifications that Paul is giving to Timothy for the office of the bishop. And what I've heard, the logic behind citing this verse, this passage is, look, these are the qualifications. So anybody that meets these qualifications, you know, can become a bishop or an elder. So obviously it's the same thing, right? That it's a non sequitur to say just because somebody has these qualifications that they can appoint themselves, or they can be appointed by some sort of congregational polity. This is two totally different arguments. So let me give an example here. So, like, in order to become the president of the United States, you have to meet certain qualifications. You have to, you know, be a U.S. Citizen. You have to be a certain age. There's other ones I'm sure that I'm missing that I don't know. That doesn't mean, so say I meet Zach, I meet all these qualifications right now. Does that mean I can just say, hey, look, I'm the president, I meet all the qualifications, so like it's me now, President Zach? Obviously not. So that the same thing is true here when in the scriptures.
Yeah. And if you're watching this and not listening to it, you can see I'm putting up the verses there on the screen. Verse 1 is actually the first verse that we were discussing already. But you're just kind of discussing the whole passage in a little bit of a different scope here. I mean, there's these qualifications. I don't know. I think my response to that would just be like, there are qualifications for somebody that holds an office. Like, what's remarkable about that? Like, the context of this is St. Paul is writing to a bishop, to St. Timothy, who was the bishop. Wasn't he the bishop of Crete? Is that correct?
Timothy?
Yeah.
No, that was Titus.
That was Titus, correct.
Ephesus,
yes. But so yes, he's writing to a man that he has ordained by the laying on of his hands to the bishopric. And just giving somebody who is in authority, a position who is in, like a person who is in this position of authority, guidance on how to exercise his authority. So like, it's actually like, I mean, I would argue that the book of Timothy is actually an argument for apostolic succession, because there's a completely different sort of pastoral guidance that Paul gives to Timothy than what he gives in his pastoral letters to entire congregations. So you can see Paul speaks in a different manner to somebody who's a bishop, who has been ordained by the laying on of his hands, than he does to the laity. And so, like, to me, it's actually a clear demonstration that there's something about the authority that Paul has given to Timothy, and then he expects Timothy to safeguard that and to pass it on faithfully. And part of that is him here, like, I would think, reminding Timothy his guidance and instruction, and putting down in writing kind of a summary of things that he probably taught him like directly. Um,
Hmm.
but just kind of like, I don't know, just pointing out to Timothy is like, yeah, as you go forward and as you lead the church and as you are ordaining ministers in the church, here's the kind of guidelines that you should follow. That, first of all, if somebody is desiring this position, like, well, that's good. And when we like, maybe you could cast that in this light as him saying like, um, you know, you should pay attention you should pay attention to people who actually do have a desire to serve the church, because we would say that in the Orthodox Church is that having a desire to enter the priesthood is actually a good thing. And like men actually do need to stand up and take responsibility. That's part of being a man. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and if
kind of
you put this, so if
down
you
here.
put these put these in the context of the entire epistle, Paul is is telling Timothy to not lay hands on men hastily. So you see
Right.
this laying on of hands is continuing on. Like he's telling that he's the inference there is that this laying on of hands continues as the means of appointing new ministers.
Yeah,
So
right. Yeah, I mean, and the laying on of hands hastily is a problem that always plagues the church. Like we have problems right now with former Orthodox priests who were ordained hastily and then apostatized.
it's
So like,
true, very true.
yeah, I mean, it's something the church always has to guard for. So it's like, yeah, make
Mhm.
sure, I don't know, make sure you actually properly vet the people you're ordaining to the ministry. That's pretty important.
And this so this last objection that I wanted to go over is that, and I actually heard this recently from a Protestant pastor, that apostolic succession doesn't guarantee faithfulness to the ministry. So he's going to cite different people that have fallen away basically from the faith. Um, so so the problem with this is um, that so like we were talking about with Paul there, Paul says, do not neglect the gift that was given to you by the laying on of hands. So that implies that he could neglect the gift that was given to him through the laying on of hands. So there is a gift that's given, and you can neglect it. So just because the misuse of something uh, doesn't negate the positive use of it, right? So it's the same thing. It's the same thing with baptism. So anybody that believes in baptismal regeneration, um, I think basically everybody that believes in that across traditions, like you can lose the grace that's given to you by neglecting that grace, by falling away and making bad decisions. So like
Mhm.
it's the same thing. It's the same thing with the gifts of ministry.
Well, yeah, and it's like God doesn't compel himself on anybody. Even those who have received, even those who have received the Holy Spirit, even those who have received the divine gifts, that the Christian life is always one of participation in the divine grace of God, in the energies of God. Um, and so, while we believe in baptismal regeneration, while we believe that the laying on of hands actually bestows a real grace upon the one who is ordained, that doesn't mean like it's some kind of um, I don't know, like it's some kind of destruction of their free will, because yeah, I think that's just
Yeah, and we're not
the way
and
I
we're
look
not
at it.
we don't believe in the infallibility of the individual. So that doesn't
Right.
even make sense. Like as a Protestant, you you're not going to believe that, and as Orthodox, we don't believe that.
Uh-huh.
And I don't even think, obviously, I don't even think Roman Catholics believe that for anybody but the Pope. So
Mm-hmm.
what? Like, it's really a straw man, ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. That it is kind of a straw man, or a misunderstanding or misrepresentation, or even kind of like a bad faith argument to point out, well, ordination doesn't keep people from falling away. Like Judas, like, what do you do about Judas? Judas
Good
lived
point.
with Christ for 3 years, and Christ says about that, he's, like, have I not chosen you myself, and one of you has a devil?
Yeah,
Um,
and does Judas negate the rest of the apostleship?
or,
Because
or or
he fell away.
does Judas negate the grace that is on somebody by abiding in Christ? Like, obviously not. Like, I
Right.
don't know. You would have to believe that living with God Himself in the flesh for 3 years is nothing. I don't know. To me, that's like the rational conclusion of that line of thinking. Um,
Agree. So did you want to, like, we can so that was it for those objections. Like, I think we can make a more positive case for
Yeah, that's
having.
kind of what I was gonna press you on next, is like, okay, like you've dealt with some of the objections, and there are other objections, but the biggest objection people are going to have, aside from those, is going to be, well, why do you even think it's necessary? Why do you think it's necessary? Like, can't Christ, you know, especially if you have like this invisible church ideology, like, can't God do whatever He wants? Which again, you'll point to the example of St. Paul and say, yes, God can in fact do whatever He wants, but um,
Yeah,
that doesn't mean you can do whatever you
unless he
want.
does unless he does do the thing, then it's not real. It's not legitimate.
Well, I
So
mean, part of the way that I look at it is that apostolic succession is a grace of God for us. It is an action of God's grace for our sake. That, like, in theory, yes, God can and does do whatever He desires, and obviously, I would agree, and I think pretty much any Orthodox Christian will agree, since God is absolutely sovereign and is not bound by any limitation, that God can raise somebody up in the true ministry of Christ anywhere if He wants to. But the reason that's not the way that it works is because the church exists for the sake of our salvation and for the sake of the salvation of the world. And what God has given us, the gift that God has given us with apostolic succession, is so that we can know what the church is. Um, so that, like, it's precisely to avoid the kind of problem that you have in Protestantism. The sort of problem that leads to a lot of us becoming Orthodox is you're stuck with conflicting answers and asking the question, who has the authority? Who has the understanding to interpret the Scripture? Who do I believe? Who do I listen to? And what I'm saying is, God has given us the gift of apostolic succession. Like, we're not saying it's a necessity, as in God is somehow bound to this and can't operate outside of these bounds. Rather, it's the gift of God for the sake of our salvation, that we can say, we know what God has given us. We understand the promises that God has made, and He's promised to uphold His church and to not allow it to fall, not and to guide it into all truth, so that we don't have to be wandering through the world, always having to figure out the answers for ourselves, so that we can actually have faith and trust in God. And to me, when I look at apostolic succession like that, it's like, why would I want to argue against this? And really what it amounts to is the actual reason that I want to argue against it is because what God has delivered to me through the succession of the church is not what I want it to be. and my own pride gets in my way and causes me to stumble. I think that's often like I'm just speaking from my own personal experience. Like so it's like that's kind of the conclusion ultimately that I came to, is that, well, orthodoxy isn't what I want Christianity to be, and that's why if I'm being honest, why I don't believe in apostolic succession. It's
Yeah, I think
a
that's
sin
got
that you have to repent of.
I think that's got to be what it is, because it's so clear in the scriptures. It's not even one of these things that we really have to like to
Mhm.
debate. I mean, I've never heard anybody make a coherent case
Yeah.
against it. It usually goes into these different things like attacking the threefold ministry, and just these
Yeah.
tangents that don't actually get to the heart of the issue.
Okay,
So
but yeah, let's go with what you're saying there. I mean, I'll just play devil's advocate just a little bit here, is because if you are coming from a Protestant position today, then what you're saying isn't exactly going to be a compelling argument, because like if I'm in that position where I was never taught apostolic succession, or I was taught even against apostolic succession, I'm taught this individual uh inspiration of the Holy Spirit, or this invisible church ideology, then you have to demonstrate to me why I should believe in apostolic succession. So I think that's part of what we have to do. We
yeah,
can we can
and
argue that we stand on the position of history, which we do, and that's part of the argument. But just like put yourself in the position of the Protestant, and
yeah, sure,
you have to
yeah.
demonstrate to me a positive case why I should believe in apostolic succession.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. So I sent two verses to you there,
Yeah.
that are very pertinent to this. So um, you can maybe Hebrews 5:4. Let's go there first.
Okay.
So the context of Hebrews 5:4 is the author there is talking about, um, he's talking about the office of the high priest, and he's saying that no man takes this honor to himself, but he who is called by God, just as Aaron was. And then he proceeds to also say in verse 5, he's talking about how Christ is also bound by this principle, because he's essentially called by the Father to do the same thing. So right there you have the high priest and Christ, our high priest himself, that are bound by this principle. So we as the church ministry is clearly also bound by these principles, if Christ himself is bound by this principle. So
Hmm.
so you have so being called by God, that is a very particular thing in the scriptures. That is either done through extraordinary means, where like we talked about with Paul, or with Aaron here, as it's talking about here,
Hmm.
or it's done through ordinary means, where it's passed on from those who have that extraordinary means,
Hmm.
through succession.
Yeah.
So yeah.
There's a good point there. I'm not sure if this is exactly the point that you were making, but or maybe it was, and I just got sidetracked. But when Christ came in the flesh, he was coming in the fulfillment of certain prophecies, but also in the fulfillment of promises that God had made beforehand to Abraham and to the prophets, and especially to King David. Um, And it was really, really important, as part of the fulfillment of that prophecy, is that Christ came within a certain lineage. Uh, you know, Christ wasn't just born of some random woman, or into some random house, or in some random town, but he was born in the house, in the lineage of David. And that's really, really important in prophecy and in the gospel, is to point this out. And this is why, Um, is it 2 or 3 of the Gospels? Do all the synoptic Gospels include the genealogy of Christ, or is it just 2 of them? I can't remember.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not.
But like this is really important to include the genealogy of Christ. And Christ even points this out to the Pharisees when they're bragging about being the sons of Abraham. He does say God could raise up these stones as sons of Abraham if he wanted to. But the simple fact of the matter is that Christ is in the house of Abraham, and in the house of Isaac, and in the house of Jacob, and in the house of David. And I think there's also an argument out there that he's also in the house of Levi, according to one of the genealogies. I don't know if that's correct. But we have these other things, Christ like endorsing the succession of the Pharisees by pointing out they do sit in Moses' seat. There is this continuation of the Mosaic office. And so like this concept of a literal succession is actually pretty central to the story of the gospel. And like, I would have to raise a serious question if you're saying that at some point this just stopped mattering. Actually, where's the evidence of that? Where at any point does the New Testament point out that this system, that for one thing is central to the fulfillment of the gospel, but is also like a central part of everything in the Old Testament? Like, where does this stop? Where does this end? Well, like,
Yeah,
where are we told this is no longer the way things work?
right. You could say that about a lot of things that Protestants just presume to end, like like the priesthood,
Mhm.
uh, like liturgical worship. I mean, in fact, we know it doesn't end because it's in the last book of the Bible. But they still will ad hoc kind of you know say it ended. But so yeah, I mean, it's um, yeah,
Mhm.
I think you made some really good points there. So this next one is also from Hebrews that I wanted to cite. It's Hebrews 7:7. So this kind of emphasizes the points I already made. And I think the thing here is it does it in a more general way than the verse 5:4 does. Is it's showing the principle that was just described, that's being described in 5:4. It's showing the same thing applies generally. So without any dispute, the lesser person is blessed by the greater. So that it just shows this is a principle that applies across the board. Um, within the hierarchy of God's people. Like it. For example, like when we're in a church and say that like we receive a blessing from our priest, but at the end of every church service.
Mhm.
So, but say that we were there and our bishop was there also. Well, nobody's going to go to their nobody's going to go to their priest when the bishop is there, because because the bishop he's the one where the blessing's ultimately coming from.
Right.
So like this principle, like like we are fully in line with this principle as Orthodox Christians. It's very innate to our
Yeah. Well, and
church.
I think we need to add to that, like, if so I think a good example of that is actually the Greek practice where, the only place where I've actually witnessed this in person was in a Greek Orthodox monastery at St. Gregory Palamas Monastery, where in their practice, they actually will not venerate the icons or the cross after they receive the Eucharist. Because like going along with your illustration, like you wouldn't receive a blessing from the priest if the bishop was there. Um, like their line of thinking is once you've received the blessing from Christ himself, there's like why would you then receive a blessing from Christ's representatives? I think that is a good illustration of that same principle. 'Cause, like the Eucharist is the highest level of blessing that you can possibly receive because you've literally received Christ himself.
Right. So like if we extrapolate this principle like to the church ministry, obviously you can see how this all
Yeah.
supports apostolic succession.
Yeah, and there are a number of other verses as well. I don't know if you had others or
Oh
like
yeah,
they're just
I got a lot. Like we can.
okay.
How long do you want to be here? Like
Yeah, I
like I
think it'd be
said.
good to just like real quick run through a bunch of Bible verses just just to kind of circumvent any complaints that we're not arguing from Scripture.
Well, I think it's good to establish the roots of it in the Old
Yeah,
Testament
right.
because we believe that God doesn't change, and the way that um, he appoints his ministry throughout the ages hasn't changed. So at least the principles of it. So we can go back to Moses to Joshua. Like in Numbers 27, where Moses knew that he wouldn't enter the promised land, and the whole succession process there, where God chose Joshua. You know, because Moses asked him to appoint a new leader. So through that, Moses laid hands on Joshua and in front of the priest and the congregation, and then at that point Joshua was filled with the Spirit, because Moses laid hands on him. So the same principle you see, these are the same principles of apostolic succession in the Old Testament, and we see it with some other situations with Elijah to Elisha, where God instructed Elijah to anoint Elisha as his prophetic successor. Let me see what else we got here. So there's obviously a succession of the high office of the high priest,
Hmm.
hereditary.
Yeah, I was gonna point that out. I guess you got there. I was too impatient. That like not only is it a succession, but it's like it's actually a hereditary succession, and like this like is increasingly happening throughout the story of the Bible. Is that it has to make sure the succession is happening according to the correct line, and this familial line is important. Even though in the Old Testament it is like a literal in the sense that it is like a father passing down to his son in that sense. Um, but that is really important in pointing towards how we do things in the church, because the church is a family, and that's why we use familial language in the church. Like for example, why the leaders of our churches are called patriarchs. It's because the church is a family, and the patriarch is the head of the household. And so yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to bring out how that familial lineage of the priesthood in the Old Testament is pointing towards what is still happening in the church, and then arguing for the orthodox interpretation of apostolic succession, in which it also requires a lineage of faithfulness, is that certain lines of Aaron's family lose their succession to the priesthood, and like eventually it becomes clear that it's only the house of Zadok that has the legitimate high priesthood. That's why a certain sect at the time of Jesus calls themselves the Sadducees, is that because they're trying to make the claim we are the ones with the legitimate succession, but they're actually not. They're just making it up.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I mean, I could go on here. There's the Davidic, kingly succession as well. It's the same principle. Obviously, this is a different. The monarch is distinct from the religious. Well, I mean, I say religious, but like it's distinct from the priesthood and everything. But
Mhm.
it's the same. My
Sort
point is,
of.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
say like they're interconnected. They're a part of the same thing. It's not like this separation of church and state thing.
Right.
It's he's confessional to the ecclesia of the time, right?
Yeah.
So so what my point is with all this is you see the same principle of this successorship, throughout the entire Old Testament. So so I think that pretty much covers that. So we can go to apostolic succession in the New Testament because the same principle continues on right off the bat. Like
well, before we get
with Christ.
Before we get to the New Testament, though, I think I would like to say just a little bit about the northern kingdom of Israel. That the northern kingdom of Israel is always portrayed as being illegitimate, and they're illegitimate for two reasons. Like they don't have the legitimate line of the king because they, they've basically broken away from the house of David, who is the anointed house of God, and just have this line of corrupt kings who just decide out of nowhere, we want to rule, we are in charge now. Because I mean, really like a very Protestant sort of complaint, because we think the house of David is bad and corrupt and we would do a better job of ruling ourselves. And then they also create their own temples. They create two temples and they create their own priesthood. So like I think they are like a strong Old Testament shadow of, I don't know, I hesitate to say this, but kind of like an Old Testament prophecy of Protestantism.
Yeah, proto-Protestantism. Yeah, there's actually another really good example in the Old Testament of proto-Protestants, and that is the rebellion at Korah. So, so what you have
but that's also that story is also like a very good argument in favor of apostolic succession, because the sons of, not the sons of, like Korah there, he is making he's making the same sort of argument that Protestants want to make, which is essentially like, you were probably getting there. I'm just preempting you.
If you were to read the verse, and I have it here somewhere, basically it sounds like something like a Protestant would say. Like, I mean, like the actual verse, and I hope I can find it here because I have a ton of notes, and I'm getting things mixed up. So, oh yeah, I got it here. Okay, yeah. So basically, here's what they say, because they're accusing Moses and Aaron of basically exalting themselves, right? So they say, "You have gone too far, for all in the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" So see this sort of like egalitarian, mindset where, hey, look, we're all equal here, man. Like, why are you guys trying to put yourselves on a pedestal, kind of a thing?
Yeah, that is Numbers 16, just for the record.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that's a very good point. And then like I pointed out, like also the Northern Kingdom, then later on, doing this. I don't know. Maybe we should wrap up this story of Korah. Just point out how that this is the whole story with Aaron's rod that budded. It's like, okay, you guys think this, like, well, let's let God show what his proper choice is. And so they all don't they put them in the ark, their rods, or do they just, I can't remember the exact details. I think they put them in the ark, don't they?
I can't remember either. So
the one that God chooses, his rod will bud. And of course, Aaron's rod is the rod that buds, which, by the way, if you ever see the budded cross, the Antiochians especially like their budded cross, but it's the cross and it has the little boops at the end. That's the budded cross. Because Aaron's rod that budded is, it's prefiguring the cross. I just wanted to throw that in there because it's like this lifeless, dead, dry wood that springs to life, and it's prefiguring that, like, from the death of Christ comes life. I just thought I'd throw that in there just so people, I love that kind of symbolism.
Yeah, that's
moving on.
So we actually have another example of an illegitimate ministry in actually the New Testament. So in Acts 8, there's a guy named Simon Magus. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
He basically, so he does a little something a little different here, but he's trying to basically. So I'll just read Acts 8, 18 through 20. Now, when Simon saw that the Spirit was given through the laying on of the apostles' hands, he offered them money, saying, "Give me this power also." But Peter said to him, "May your silver perish with you, because you thought you could obtain the gift of God with money." So
Hmm.
I know that like you know that people out there probably aren't like trying to like buy the office, but this still demonstrates the principle that the office is not just something that you can acquire however you want to acquire it. You
Yeah.
know,
To be
whether
fair, to
money
be fair,
or
in the history of the church, there are definitely people who have bought their offices.
yeah. I mean, it's a heresy. It's called
Mhm.
simony. I mean, it's named
Right.
after, just like
Right.
every other named after the person that started it. So I
Hmm.
mean, yeah, of course, it's a grave offense to to do this, but it just demonstrates the principle that you cannot assume the office to yourself, just
Hmm.
like it's talked about in Hebrews.
Yeah.
So
Um, I think there's something I really quick want to point out there, though, is because this is a counter argument that I'm used to hearing. So, for example, people might point to the history of, let's say, the Patriarch of Constantinople, and point out how there's a long string of patriarchs of Constantinople that are appointed by Turkish sultans, and they're collaborators with the Turkish government, or there might have been a couple patriarchs during the Soviet Union who are collaborators with the Soviet government. And so people will point to this to say, like, this illegitimizes the whole office, or this illegitimizes the whole church. But the reason why that's not a good argument is because the office of patriarch, or the office of bishop in the Orthodox Church, isn't handed down from one office holder to the next, in the sense that, like, I am your direct successor and I receive it directly from you. Rather, somebody is ordained to such an office by the laying on of hand of, isn't it at least three bishops have
well,
to be?
I'm not sure, but there's definitely a conciliar principle there.
You're right.
Just like you see in First Timothy, right? Because he says, not only does he say through the laying on of my hands, but through the laying on of hands of the presbytery. So
Right.
there's a conciliar operation there when it comes to ordaining new ministers.
Yeah, that just came to my mind real quick, and I thought I would real quick address that possible complaint. That is, like, just because there are people who, for example, have bought their bishopric, have bought their episcopate, exercise simony. This has happened in the Orthodox Church. It's happened in the Roman Catholic Church. And just because that happens doesn't mean that that whole office is now illegitimate and discarded and has fallen away, because the ordination doesn't come like the ordination doesn't come through that. There's a corrupt patriarch. Okay, so what? The next patriarch isn't going to be, like, it's not like he's appointing his successor, or something like that. Anyway, I think we can move on from that.
Right. So back to the New Testament, we see this principle of apostolic succession right off the bat. Obviously, with Jesus, like you were talking about, with his lineage being described
Mhm.
there at the beginning of the Gospels. But what does he do with the 12? So he does the same thing with the 12. He appoints the 12 as the functional leaders of the New Testament church. Um, Not only does he do that, actually, he appoints the 70
Mhm.
also,
Yeah.
but it's the
Uh,
same. It's the same.
yeah, and so if you want to make some kind of claim here that this ends the Old Testament succession, because Christ comes and undoes all of that. Well, it's like, well, okay, but you have to recognize that what happens here with Christ is that this is God in the flesh ordaining his apostles. And, like we would really say restoring the, we did have a mention in the comments here of the line of Melchizedek, Christ restoring, you could say, the line of Melchizedek, or really restoring the line of Adam, um, restoring the true priesthood to humanity in the church. And so if you're making some kind of claim that this ends any sort of succession, it's like, well, when did God himself show up in the flesh to ordain your leadership? As far as I know, the only other group of people in the, I guess you could say, the broader Christian neighborhood that even claims something like that would be the Mormons. And of course, there's uh, some other problems with Mormon ideas of succession,
Clearly.
but but yeah, like we're not. This isn't an anti-Mormon podcast, so we're not going to get into that tonight. But yeah, I just want to, I don't know what I was trying to bring out with that is like God himself instituted the priesthood of the church. And that's not a small deal. And yeah, just like God himself instituted the Aaronic priesthood in the beginning.
Right. So, um, back to so after Christ ascends, and now we have the apostles, and it's just the apostles in the church. Right away, like literally the first chapter of Acts, you see um, you see Judas being replaced, and this is clearly in the same line of the same principle as apostolic succession, right? He's being replaced as he has a successor with Matthias. So,
Mhm.
um, so jump down a little bit further in Acts. We have Acts 6, where some problems are arising in the church, where some people were needing help and they're not getting it.
Mhm.
So the
Well,
apostles yeah.
before you go too much further with that, I want to point out that, like, even within the Orthodox tradition and the patristic tradition, there's something kind of curious going on with Matthias, in which it's not actually clear that Matthias was, I guess you could say, the chosen successor to take the place of Judas. Because, like, you do see in some of the patristic writings that it's like, well, actually, Saint Paul was the 12th apostle. Um, and so, that's a possible objection somebody might raise to that example. But I was thinking about that earlier as well, especially when I was talking about the use of lots among Mennonites to ordain ministers. Um, I don't know. I think it's interesting to consider the implications of that. It's like, well, is it possible for the church to get it wrong and ordain the wrong person, and then God come along and kind of fix things? I want to be careful how I'm saying that, because, like I say, I'm not trying to criticize the apostles, but I just think that's an interesting point that somebody might bring into the conversation. I
Well,
don't know.
even if like say they didn't consider him an apostle of the first order,
Mhm,
that's that doesn't discredit the principle of apostolic succession, because we would say that the successors of the apostles are not apostles of the first order anymore. So because they weren't directly appointed by Christ, they were appointed by his apostles. So I mean, I don't see how that would even be a real objection. But moving on, so Acts 6, you see the apostles creating the office of the deacon, the diaconate there,
right.
and this is actually one of the earlier objections that I wanted to talk about, but I forgot to list it there. So you see the apostles say basically, you guys need to pick men from your congregation, and then that's what they do, and then the apostles then lay hands on them and appoint them as deacons. So what you're going to, like a lot I've seen Protestants do before, is they'll try to say, look, the apostles told them to pick their deacons. It's like, yeah, okay, well, but the picking out or selecting your deacons is not the same thing as appointing them. Those are two different things. Like, we still do this in our local parishes today, where we will we choose, like the priest will choose a, like someone worthy of the diaconate, but who actually appoints them as a deacon? Well, it's the bishop, right? So the exact same principle there.
Yeah, and I was just thinking of that while you were saying that. It's like what's described here in the book of Acts. Like the Orthodox Church today does literally that. And that's expected. I heard a story this last weekend from a visiting priest, speaking at a men's thing on Saturday. Was talking about a certain parish church that was complaining to their metropolitan that they're this old established parish in America, and their priest retired, and then the metropolitan doesn't send them a new priest, and it's like, don't you have any respect for us for as long as we've been a parish in your in your jurisdiction? And his answer back to them is like, in the 100 years or however long it's been that you've been here, how many priests have you sent me? And the answer was none. So, but like the point of that story is like, that's expected of the local congregations in the Orthodox Church. To be a faithful congregation it's expected that you're going to send, like you see here in the book of Acts, you're going to pick out from among your men people who are qualified for the diaconate or people who are qualified for the priesthood, and then send them to your, really to your apostles, because the bishops sit in the seats of the apostles. Their authority is the apostolic authority. So in the same sense, we're still doing that. We're still sending our qualified men to those who sit in the seat of the apostles, so that they can then lay their hands on them and ordain them as presbyters and deacons, just like you see here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So we continue to see this this appointment. Hey, you guys, somebody spam in the chat with some baloney. So I don't know if you want to boot them or what, but
yeah, I see that. I guess if he keeps it up, I'll boot him, but for now I'll just leave it there, just I guess so people have some entertainment if they get bored.
Yeah. So yeah, so on you in Acts, you continue to see this principle. Acts 14, when they had appointed elders for them in every church with prayer and fasting, they committed them to the Lord. Okay, so and then Titus 1:5, that's Paul talking to Titus. Appoint elders in every town as I directed you. So it's interesting there because this is kind of demonstrating that Titus had the authority over the entire island of Crete to appoint elders, and nobody else there did. So that's really interesting. It's a pretty good proof in Titus for the bishopric, because if all these guys had the same authority, if they all had the same authority as Titus, like, why does Titus need to be the one appointing everybody there? Crete's like not a big place. Like, you can get around there, pretty quickly, I'd imagine. So what would be the point of him having to appoint all the elders there instead of just like a couple that can appoint other people? So, and we know through church tradition that Titus, it's a historical fact that Titus was the first bishop of Crete. If you go to the island of Crete today, it's a well-known fact that that Titus is the first bishop of Crete, but we have, modern Protestants that think they know better than the people that have lived there for 2,000 years. So that's just a point. But so on, further on in the New Testament, Timothy's ordination by Paul. We've already kind of talked about this, but do not neglect the gift you have, which was given to you by prophecy when the council of elders laid their hands on you. But he also said it's also through the laying on of my hands. So again, there's this conciliar method of ordination there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and the conciliarity also continues past the death of the apostles, because I was just talking to you a little bit before we were talking about Saint Dionysius the Areopagite, and I'm a firm believer that the Dionysian corpus is authentic, and there's
I
more
agree.
and more research that is completely vindicating that position. And one thing, one of his most well-known, one of the most well-known of his works was actually a letter that he sent to Titus. That Titus, I guess, had asked him for some, I don't know, some guidance or something, or asked him to, to help him with these things. And so he wrote, I believe it's the Divine Names, is actually a letter to Saint Titus. So here's the Bishop of Athens sending a letter to the Bishop of Crete. So it's just kind of neat to see that conciliarity at play in the early church.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, one other interesting, I guess kind of a little bit of a getting a little sidetracked here, but I just wanted to bring it up because I just thought it was the coolest thing the first time I heard this was, like we have the story of Lazarus in the scriptures, but we don't really, it doesn't really talk about really what happened, what he did after that, once he was, came back to life. But we know from church history that he went on to live another, I think it was 20 or 30 years. And he was a bishop. He was the Bishop of Cyprus. So if you go to Cyprus today, he's venerated there, as a bishop. I think maybe the first. I'm not sure if he's the first bishop there, but he's venerated as a bishop in the church there in Cyprus. So it's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so obviously you see this continue on in First and Second Timothy, because as we talked about before, First and Second Timothy are just all about basically apostolic succession. So one really good proof text that kind of shows that or demonstrates the importance, or I guess maybe you could say the utility of apostolic succession is 2 Timothy 2:2, where Paul says, what you heard from me, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So right there in that verse, you have literally 4 generations of transmission. You have Paul, obviously talking to Timothy, who's going to pass on the faith to faithful men, and those faithful men are going to pass it on to others. And actually, it's interesting because that word able there in 2 Timothy 2:2 also means qualified. So he's literally saying that this is how you will be qualified to teach others. So this is that to be qualified, that is a qualification. So a qualification to teach in to teach in the church is to be a part of this succession of ministry that being outlined throughout the entire pastoral epistles.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's just look at that from a practical perspective. So, for example, if I'm sorry, I'm gonna boot this guy from the
yeah, this
from,
is some
from
pretty
the chat here.
lame TikTok grade stuff, but
Yeah, sorry, I don't like to ban people, but that was just getting annoying and distracting. So,
I mean, yeah, if you had a pertinent thing, to the topic at hand, that'd be one thing. But you're just going off on, yeah, some interesting people online. We'll say that.
Yeah,
Uh,
something that has nothing to do with the topic at hand. So it's just a distraction.
like it's
Um,
like a pet theory on something. But yeah,
yeah.
so then,
Where was I at? Oh yeah. So it's like, you know, it's if I am operating in this, this Protestant paradigm where I feel like I have some kind of calling to be a preacher or a minister or something like that, it's like, well, how do I actually know that? Where does the authority for that come from? And like I did kind of like that in the Mennonite world, where it's like, well, you can't just choose that you're going to be a preacher. Like very often people who feel like that's the way that things work end up like splitting away from those churches, just like they do in the Orthodox Church. Somebody who's not willing to abide by the way, by the way ordination works, by the way the priesthood works, and is told by their priest, you shouldn't be doing this teaching ministry. You're not qualified to do that. But it's like, that like for me personally, like that's against my, I don't know, like every sense of ethics that I have. That's part of why, you know for us at the Sacred Life, we're just unwilling to call ourselves teachers, um because like who gave you that authority, and what defense do you have in having any certainty that, how am I saying this? Having any certainty that the spirit that is leading you is actually the Holy Spirit. And in the church, with this system of apostolic authority, like it's very clear that the Holy Spirit works within the confines of his church, within the confines of his covenant. And like that goes back to the argument that I was presenting earlier, that it's a matter of certainty, and like that this is a gift of God's grace to us, so that we can actually know if something is true or not. Like we're not left. I don't know. I think the danger that we often see with people is that they really lack that kind of certainty, and in order to deal with that uncertainty, they have to like really dig their heels in and insist that they like pridefully insist that they actually have it.
right, yeah, and you see this in this necessity of certainty in the New Testament, actually, because during that time it was a dangerous. I mean, it was certainly dangerous to be a Christian. During that New Testament period, and so when somebody came, like from somewhere else, proclaiming to be, a an authority, they were going to ask them who sent you. You know, that was a big thing, and what you're teaching, right? But the first part of that's more important, because they needed to know that that person came from a legitimate, uh, another legitimate authority in the church. There's actually a verse that describes this in Romans 10:15, I believe, and it says, how can they preach unless they are sent? So that it's showing you right there that, like, this is important. um and maybe like, at least here in, like, the Western, USA, we're not living in some sort of dangerous, um it's not like a danger to be a Christian, and we need to know that somebody's coming, not to be like a spy or something like that. But I think that the same principle applies, where we need to have a normative means to know that somebody is a legitimate minister in the church,
Right.
uh, for sound teaching.
Hmm.
So
Well, it's like you create a scenario. I'm not quite sure how to articulate this so it's clear what I mean and what I don't mean. But my concern with a system lacking apostolic succession, or any of these Protestant systems, is that you lack a system in which faith is actually possible. Because like what faith really means is that you how should I describe what I mean by faith in this concept is like you trust God, you believe what God has said is true, and because of that, you're willing and able to let go of trying to understand and control everything. And in these systems where there is no apostolic succession, that's not possible. And in fact, the opposite of that is upheld as a virtue. That, like I remember having this conversations with people in the past where like I would say things like, not everybody has to understand what they're doing. Not everybody has to actually have the system worked out. Like it's actually virtuous for somebody to just be simple and believe and trust in what they're taught by those in authority over them and just do what's asked of them. Like that's virtuous.
Yeah.
And this person was just like, "No, I can't agree with that. I think everybody has to know. Everybody has to search the scriptures for themselves. Everybody has to find the answers," or however you want to say that, and just be like, "Well, this can't possibly be true because the Bible speaks so highly." For example, the centurion who sends his servant to Jesus, to ask, well, I can't remember, is it his son that needs healing or something like that? He sends his servant to ask, no, or maybe he goes, I can't remember, but he goes and asks Jesus, "Can you do this thing?" And and it's just like, "You don't even have to come. If you say it's so, I'm a man in authority and I understand how things work. If you say that this is the way that it is, then that's the way it is. That's all I need to hear."
Yeah.
And it's like, and what is Jesus' response to this? Is like, "I have not seen faith like this anywhere in Israel."
Right.
And it's just that simple faith that it's like, "No, I know that you're trustworthy, and so I believe you." And that's the kind of faith that we need to have as Christians. And
It's
that
also
story
kind yeah.
always
It's
bothered
also
me. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's kind of like just operating on first principles. Like
Mhm,
like if like the authority comes from God, then that automatically means that you don't have uh like what gives you the right to
mhm.
basically like think that you interpret the scriptures for yourself.
Yeah.
And that is like that's demonstrated with the Ethiopian eunuch where he's reading the scriptures, and was it Philip, I think, that comes to him and says, do you understand what you're reading? And he has the humility to say, how can I unless somebody teaches me? And
Mhm, right.
obviously the context there isn't just anybody who thinks that they know a lot about the Bible. The context is an actual minister from the church, which is Philip. Philip
Yeah.
is like he's a deacon, and he was sent there to to baptize the eunuch. So
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, and that's remarkable because, like, for one thing, this Ethiopian, wasn't ignorant of the scriptures. Like, you have to imagine he wasn't ignorant of the scriptures or of the Jewish religion. Like, he was himself an Ethiopian Jew, uh, but, like, understands, I mean, but, like, part of the meaning of the story is that we don't understand the meaning of the prophecy until Christ comes to show us what it means. But also understand in the context that that is ministered through, like, hierarchically through Christ's apostle, and that's still how it works. It's like that's, I don't know. I think what I was trying to get at with what I was saying a minute ago is that true faith is actually not possible outside of hierarchy. Um,
hmm
and I think that's a really, really important point for us to wrap our minds around. Um, I don't know. I think I'll just like leave it at that and just kind of let that ring in your minds.
yeah, I think people just kind of take for granted this, the egalitarianism that we're born into, here in the West, and that is not normative for the vast majority of history.
Yeah, but it's like
Certainly.
also also, like I was saying, it's opposed to the biblical concept of faith. The
Yeah.
Greek word, especially pistis, um, I don't know, a better English translation of that word is actually faithfulness, just because the way the word faith has evolved in modern English is something different than what the Greek word actually means.
Mhm.
But that kind of faithfulness to God, like you have to, I don't know, you have to be able to, you have to be able to trust in the things that God has set in front of you.
Mhm.
And like I don't know, like that's a big part of my argument for the necessity of the indefectibility of the church and of apostolic authority, apostolic succession.
Yeah. So the only other thing that I got in my notes here is I don't know if you wanted to get into the early church on, or the early fathers on apostolic succession, um, even if just briefly. I mean, it's up to you.
Um, Maybe just briefly. We're already at an hour and a half here, and I don't know if people are going to have any questions.
Yeah, if you guys in the chat start thinking about it, start posting them now, or if you just have straight up objections, you
Yeah.
don't have a. If we just think we're just super wrong and ignorant, let us know and let us know why. Um, so I think that the fathers are pretty important on this issue. Well, they're important on a lot of issues, but uh, the there is a overwhelming consensus within the fathers for apostolic succession and Orthodox church polity. So
Mhm.
and it's pretty early on, through um, through the second, third, fourth centuries, and so we can just like start with like Clement of Rome, where he talks about. Um, he says that the apostles preached and appointed, church ministers, and they gave instructions that when these men should fall asleep, other approved men should succeed to their ministry. So
Mhm.
same principle there. Ignatius, do I have any Ignatius stuff? Yeah. So he's obviously making a strong emphasis on the episcopate in a lot of his letters, like to the Magnesians and the Smyrnians. Follow the bishop as Jesus Christ follows the Father. Let no one do anything pertaining to the church without the bishop. So I think that that's important because that's showing that like you have to have this bishopric that in place, or you don't have the church. So like if somebody starts something over here, then that's not the church. And what he was doing was he was emphasizing that that's why the Gnostics don't have the Docetists, they don't have um, they're not true because they're not under this bishopric. So we get back or further into the second century, Saint Irenaeus, he has some really strong quotes on it. Um, so it is possible to enumerate that those who were instituted bishops by the apostles and their successors down to our times. So he's showing right there that there is a succession all the way
Mhm.
from the apostles until his time. And
Well, I
he
mean,
also says,
let's with some of these figures, like also point out actually who they were. So, like, Saint Ignatius was himself ordained to the bishopric by. He was the student of the Apostle John. And wasn't he ordained by Peter and John, by Saint Peter and Saint John?
I think
I think
so,
that.
yeah.
And Saint Irenaeus, we were just talking about Saint Irenaeus. He was wasn't he the student of Saint Polycarp, who was also in turn the student of Saint John?
Mhm.
Um, the spiritual son of these, but then they're also like they are within the lineage that they are talking about. And so, like, what we have in examples of these, so for one thing, we can establish their authority as not having like betrayed the apostolic faith, because these were individuals. In the case of, some people like Saint Saint Ignatius. Didn't you also read from Saint Clement?
Yes.
Um, and these other figures. It's like these aren't just like random dudes who showed up. It's like, no, these are the ones that the apostles themselves recognize. Like these are, these are the right ones to take up our office. Um,
Yeah. Now I'm sure that was no small decision.
yeah, right. I mean, especially what with what you were just reading with St. Paul's instructions to Timothy regarding that.
Right.
Um, yeah, I mean, but I just thought like that's an important part of the argument, is not only what they say, but also who they were. That they are themselves examples of the principle that we're talking about.
Yep. Exactly. So we can continue on with Saint Irenaeus. We can name the bishops appointed by the apostles, but the Gnostics cannot. So I think he's kind of the church is obviously still battling this Gnosticism, and he's essentially making the same point that Saint Ignatius is making. So yeah,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
like you go to figures like Tertullian. He's going to essentially describe the same thing and assert the same arguments. So let them, the heretics, produce the origins of their churches, show the succession of their bishops from the apostles. We can say Peter ordained Clement, etc., etc. So I mean, he's making the point that these heretical groups are inevitably the ones that don't have the apostolic succession. If if we can extend that today, then what does that say about all these different Protestant bodies outside of the Orthodox Church?
Yeah.
It's not looking good. It's not looking good. So Saint Cyprian of Carthage, and he's around 250 AD. The episcopate is one, each part of which is held by each bishop for the whole. The church is one, shown in unity of succession.
Mm-hmm.
And he also says, you cannot have God for your father if you do not have the church for your mother. So the church is not this just I don't even know how you'd say it. Like, how do they explain it? The invisible church. It's not this invisible church thing. That's obviously not what Saint Cyprian is talking about when he's talking about the church as one, as in the unity of succession of bishops.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the invisible church he's talking about there.
Right.
So
there's a really good quote I have here from Saint Irenaeus, where he's talking about Saint Polycarp, that I think I'd like to read, just because it's a good illustration and demonstration of this principle. Like, not like more than just being a theoretical teaching. It's a good illustration of how it works out. He says, Polycarp also was not only instructed by apostles and conversed with many who had seen Christ, but was also by apostles in Asia appointed bishop of the church in Smyrna, whom I also saw in my early youth, for he tarried on earth a very long time, and when a very old man, gloriously and most nobly suffered martyrdom, departed this life, having always taught the things which he had learned from the apostles, and which the church has handed down, and which alone are true. To these things all the Asiatic churches testify, as do also those men who have succeeded Polycarp down to the present time. I don't know. There's an awful lot about Orthodox ecclesiology contained in that quote.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I just thought that was a good one demonstrating the point.
Yeah, definitely.
And he also says it is incumbent to obey the presbyters who are in the church, those who, as I have shown, possess the succession from the apostles, those who, together with the succession of the episcopate, have received the infallible charism of truth, according to the good pleasure of the Father. But it is also incumbent to hold in suspicion others who depart from the primitive succession and assemble themselves together in any place whatsoever, either as heretics of perverse minds or as schismatics, puffed up and self-pleasing, or again as hypocrites, acting thus for the sake of lucre or in vainglory, for all these have fallen from the truth. He's also demonstrating like the necessity of apostolic succession, which kind of gets at my point I was making out earlier, which is that when you operate outside of the boundaries of apostolic succession, then you put yourself outside of the grace of God. And what I mean by that is that apostolic succession is a gift of God's grace so that we can know what the boundaries of the church actually are, what the boundaries of the truth actually are. And like that again is my really big criticism that I direct at these Protestant ecclesiologies and these Protestant polities and all of these things is that like there's no way in this system for you to ever know what the boundaries of the church are, for you to ever know what is and what is not the church. Um, and like contrast that with the Orthodox position, which is to say, like, we know what the church is. It is this, and that is clear, and we can define that, and we can know that if we are in that, we are in the grace of God. But at the same time, recognize there might be people who are outside of that who have the grace of the Holy Spirit. We don't know. It's not our place to judge that. What we do know is here is the church. And I'm not sure that I think people really underestimate the significance of that concept and how, I don't know, how tremendous of a gift that actually is. And I don't, yeah, why would you want to reject that?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think so too. There's a lot more. We could go on for 2 more hours on this subject.
Yeah.
Like we're not gonna produce every, I don't know. I think it's vain and prideful of us to think that we're going to put out every argument for
Yeah.
apostolic succession. But yeah, I think
So
this was a good presentation that brought out a lot of good points. Hopefully it was beneficial to somebody. Yeah. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say in closing or to wrap up.
I do. Yeah, I have kind of two parting thoughts, two I guess maybe challenges I would present, or I would ask of people in the audience or listeners that do not subscribe to Apostolic Succession, or they're a member of a church that does not subscribe to it or have it. So the first one would be basically I'd like for you to go back to Numbers 16:3 and read that, where they're saying to they're saying to Moses and Aaron, they're saying, "Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" Now I want you to just be as honest as possible. And would you say that this is like something that basically that you are trying to a point you're trying to make to like the bishops and the priests of the Orthodox Church? Because I think if you were like this is what you're essentially trying to say, is you're trying to say the same thing as the people that rebelled, the core rebellion.
Hmm.
My second challenge is for you to find one single example in the New Testament of a church minister that was explicitly appointed by means other than apostolic succession. And that could be by anything. That could be by the way that however your church appoints ministers. Um, or any other way, because it's actually not there. So um, okay, so even if your church does have say a form of succession, if that succession only goes back to the 1800s, that's clearly not a legitimate succession, because the first person that started that church obviously didn't have a succession before them, right? So anyways, those are my two parting thoughts and my two challenges for that. And I'm not challenging in some I'm just if you want to be honest about this issue, these are two things that I think that you need to honestly deal with.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I need to correct a mistake I made earlier about this passage. That this actually isn't where you have the rod that budded. That was earlier. That was a different story. And because I was looking ahead here, and I wanted to find just to point out to people to remind them what happened to Korah and to his sons, to what are their names again?
yeah, well,
To Dathan and Abiram. Like
right,
what became of them?
they got swallowed up into the earth, into
Right,
Sheol.
right.
Yeah,
Like you're taken into
well,
hell alive, basically, is what
well, it's
happened.
not good. It's not good to
Yeah,
have that same mentality as those guys.
you're right.
We do have a
Um,
question. All that.
yes, we do. Let's put that up on screen from AJ. He says, most of the Protestants I have discussions with do not care about what the church fathers say. Do you run into this issue? Also, out of those, they do not really care about the Old Testament. Is a follow-up.
So I'd
Go
like
for it.
definitely like to address this. So if they don't care what the church fathers say, then why do they accept their scriptures?
Mhm.
That's kind of
Yeah,
the problem.
that's one part of the answer. I think my response is you can't reject the church fathers and also believe the scriptures. Partially because of what you say, but also because of, like, if you see our video, for example, where we're talking about restorationism and going through the prophecies concerning the church and pointing out the errors in these restorationist mentalities, and thinking that the church could have possibly fallen into apostasy and heresy as a whole. Um, because if you're rejecting the church fathers and you're not caring what they have to say, you have to along with that believe that the apostolic faith died with the apostles. You have to say that not a single historical witness other than the text of scripture has survived that witnesses what you're saying the Bible says. And in contrast to that, we point to the church fathers to say, look, these people, and like this is my own personal route towards orthodoxy, is to look at these people and say, the people who actually sat under St. Paul, or sat under St. Peter, or sat under St. John, or sat under St. Andrew, or any of these figures, like these people are far, far more qualified to understand what St. Paul actually meant, or what these other apostles actually meant with their teachings, than somebody 1,600 years later, 1,500 years later, somebody 2,000 years later. Like me, all I can do with the scripture is sit around with my buddies and argue about what we think it means, what we think St. Paul meant. But St. Ignatius actually knew what St. Paul meant because he heard it directly from his mouth, and he sat under his teaching for years. And that's true of many of these figures, like many of the apostolic fathers, like they sat directly under the apostles, oftentimes for years, or they were brought up in their faith. Like you just have to, like, you have to humble yourself and recognize, like, yeah, these people probably know more than I do. These people have a connection to something that I don't. And like for me, it's like I feel like if I actually want to be connected to the apostles, um, like I have to recognize that. Yeah, so those are my two, I guess my two main responses to that. Like you can't believe that and also believe the scripture is true, and you have to humble yourself and admit that the people who knew the apostles probably understood them better than you do.
Yeah, and so he also says
Yeah.
they don't care about the New Testament. That's
Oh,
kind of a problem. They don't care.
yeah, they don't care
Or the
about the Old Testament. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, if they say they don't care about the Old Testament, I don't know if that's exactly what they say, but that's sort of a problem. I mean, it's obviously there. So
Yeah.
if they're saying it's fulfilled, well, what does that mean? Like, I think
Right.
that the law is fulfilled, but the law doesn't include, the law is a very specific set of guidelines for
Yeah.
God's people. That doesn't include like the normative means of ordination.
Well,
And
it's
also,
just a it's just a terrible twisting of what the concept of fulfillment means.
yeah, true.
Because like to say that the law and the prophets are fulfilled does not like that doesn't mean like there's like basically no other context in which you would use the word fulfilled to mean abolished, to mean done away with.
So
It
here's a good
means,
example.
yeah, I was just going to say real quick, like it means that everything that they are describing, everything that they are pointing to, like here it is, it's Christ. Christ is the fulfillment of all of those things. Like everything that was being
Yeah,
taught by the law and the prophets is fulfilled in Christ. I mean, and I'll just real quickly throw in this little jab is that's why Mormonism can't possibly be true because it violates this concept. But anyway, you were starting to say.
Oh, I was saying that um I, I thought I'm getting really yeah. Oh, okay, I remember now. Okay, so what I was saying is that's you see this fulfillment with the Passover, right? So we have Old Testament Passover. Well, being fulfilled doesn't mean that there's not a New Testament Passover. In fact, there
Mhm.
is. Christ is the New Testament Passover. So that's obviously that's
I mean, also
that's
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 literally what
being
the
that's a
apostasy is.
fulfillment where you have it, but you have it in the Old and the New
Mhm.
Testament.
Right.
So
Yeah. But like, yeah, we observe Passover every liturgy.
right.
Yeah, and then he also points out they even point to Paul's letters to the churches and say that the church was trying to fall away during the time of the apostles. Um, um, yeah, I mean, like,
That's kind of always been the case. I mean,
yeah, like to say that there are errors during the time of the apostle is like hardly support of the fact that everybody is in error because
yeah,
obviously,
that doesn't give you like carte blanche to just do whatever you want now.
yeah, it's like Saint Paul writing to churches under his immediate jurisdiction, because of people like saying and doing bad things. It's like there are priests in the Orthodox Church that teach heresies. Like it happens. And what happens when they teach heresies is their bishops come and do whatever correction is necessary. Like it might be like just simply to point out, hey, this thing that you're teaching or that you're promoting is wrong and you need to stop. Or if they they persist, like defrocking them, whatever it might be. And there are anybody who hangs out on Orthodox Twitter knows that there's a problem with Latinizers wanting to introduce, or I guess I'll go with Father Stephen DeYoung's terminology and say they're not Latinizers; they're crypto Protestants, wanting to put these very unorthodox ideas on the Orthodox Church. So it's just like this is just the sort of thing that happens. Like Zach was saying, like it's I don't know, to extend that to say that means that these early church fathers are all heretics. Like that's just a ridiculous leap in logic. And then AJ, you also point out sometimes his last comment I appreciated. It just seems I am hitting at a barrel of water or casting pearls among swine most of the time with family. I think the kind of guidance that I'm used to hearing from priests on this is don't argue with your family. Just love your family. And if they wanna argue with things and you've already figured out you're not going anywhere with them, just tell them, look, I love you and I don't want to argue with you. I just, want to be your brother or son or whatever it might be. And, just want to love you and pray for you. And leave it at that. Not, I don't know. Like my attitude about those things is I'm not the Holy Spirit. So I can never, I don't know how to say this. I can never convince anybody like that's the work of God. And, that doesn't mean there's never a place for me to, to do like what we're doing here tonight. But when it comes down to it, it's like I'm not gonna argue somebody into heaven. I'm not gonna argue somebody into the church. You just got to pray for them and hope that I don't know their hearts will soften and the Holy Spirit will lead them to the church. Vince,
Good answer.
asks, what are our thoughts on Anglo-Catholic Apostolic Succession? I kind of touched on that at the beginning. I think there is a very incorrect concept of apostolic succession that exists within the Anglican paradigm or the Roman Catholic way of thinking, and we also think that since, in the Orthodox understanding, this is kind of a recap of what I said in the beginning again, that there are two dimensions to apostolic successions. It's not merely this kind of genetic lineage in which you so systematically trace the lineage of your priesthood all the way back to whichever apostle it might be, but rather like there is this laying on of hands, although in the Orthodox Church it works through a multitude of bishops and there's no one bishop over all bishops. Um, as I said earlier, I think it's 3 bishops have to be involved in the ordination of another bishop. And if a jurisdiction completely departs from the apostolic teaching and the apostolic faith, then they no longer have apostolic succession. Like I used the example that we think Rome doesn't have apostolic succession. We think the Anglican Church does not have apostolic succession. We don't think any of these have legitimate holy orders. We don't think the Coptic Church or the Armenian Church has apostolic succession because they've departed from the apostolic teaching. So they've lost one of the two requirements.
Is this? I'm kind of ignorant on this. The Anglosphere, but is the Anglo-Catholic? Is that the same one that just appointed a woman for their archbishop?
The Anglican, I don't know. The whole Anglican world has for a long time been extremely confusing and a mess. Usually in my experience, Anglo-Catholic refers to like the I guess you could call it the high church Anglicans, who are they're part of the Anglican communion. They're just the ones that are
Well, yeah, I just wondered
more like Catholic.
what Anglican communion is. Well, for one, there's multiple Anglican communions, right? I mean, there's even like more low church, like almost Calvinist kind of Anglicans. But like they've already they're appointing women as bishops, and like you can openly be like atheist and be a bishop in the Anglican Church. So
Yeah.
I think kind of like it's kind of that ship has sailed. Like I don't.
Yeah, well,
I
the Anglican Communion has always, like, for a long time, they've had this communion between high church and low church Anglicans were united together in the same communion, and like they would always brag
right.
about that. It's like our tradition has room for everybody, and like to those of us in the real world, it's like, no, your tradition just doesn't stand for anything. And then, like, now you're seeing the fruits of that. Like, you're ordaining women and promoting abortions and homosexuality, and now your church is split in half. Like, how's that going for you?
Yeah, and they're like I think like it's like the churches like in like their cathedrals now are basically like they're literally allowing people to come in and graffiti them, like, and they
Yeah.
think that that's like just this great thing,
Mhm. That's great
like to
inclusivity.
desecrate. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, he points out that the continuing Anglican communion refers to the more conservative branch. And yeah, I'll just kind of reiterate what I said at the beginning, is that the whole Anglican situation is very confusing for everybody. Um, I heard one Orthodox deacon define the Anglicans as, "I don't know what the Anglicans are, and neither do the Anglicans." So,
it probably depends on which Anglican you ask, I imagine.
right. Um, I think I'm ready to close. We've been going for 2 hours, and I'm starting to feel drowsy, and it's getting late
Yeah.
here. So,
Yes. Same.
yeah.
Yeah, it was a good stream. I think we covered a lot of ground, and
I thought
hopefully
it was
gave
yeah.
people something to think about.
Yep, hopefully in the comment section after this goes to video on demand, we'll get some spicy conversation going on here. So, yeah, thanks everybody again for joining us. Yeah, and just once again, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Dropping super chats is a great way to support us. Becoming a channel member is another way to support us. And also check out my website. I'm an iconographer. Consider purchasing some hand painted icons or icon prints. That also supports what we're doing here at the Sacred Life. Yeah, and just obviously liking and subscribing, sharing, helping us continue to grow. That helps as well. Yeah, just thanks everybody for joining us. And until next time, wish you all a peace in Christ.
Good night, guys.